So, ladies and gentlemen, one more time, welcome here in Samarqand. We welcome you, take your seats, because in a few minutes, we will begin our second general session. Thank you. Дамы и господа, просим занять ваши позиции за столами. Еще раз добро пожаловать в Самарканд. С минуты на минуту мы начнем нашу вторую панельную дискуссию. Dear ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please take your seats because we have no time. In a few minutes, we will begin our session. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to begin. One more time, welcome to Samarkand. Second general session, sustainability and regulation. And let me invite on the floor the moderator of the session, Mr. Mustafa Denizer, Diktaş, Turkey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mustafa Denizar. I am the Vice President of ITMF, coming from a family of textiles. As a third-generation CEO, since 1945 our company exists. That's enough for me. This session, we had the same one last year. More or less, we are the same group, so I feel like we are in the payroll of ITMF. So it's kind of checking what happened in the last 1 year in terms of regulations and sustainability works. So I don't want to take a lot of time. I have 4 distinguished guests here, speakers. Their bio is on the internet website of the ITMF, and I don't need much of an introduction. You know them very well. So I want to start with right away with Dirk, so we don't lose time. Our other guest is coming, by the way, so we are one missing, but he'll be joining us shortly.
Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure indeed to be here again and to give you an update on what is happening in Brussels in terms of EU regulation towards the textile industry. And I know many of you have many questions, because I think most of you know that we do have this dedicated EU textile strategy, which is aiming at reorganizing and re-regulating our sector. There are many questions, so what I will try to do in the next 10-11 minutes is to give you a quick update on where we stand with that regulatory framework and how it will impact on all of you. I was also planning to share, and I will try to do it very quickly, to share with you a bigger picture, because back in June of this year, we had European elections. And with those European elections, we have a new European government being created. And with that new European government, we have new political priorities, which will determine the future of the European Union and its relations with the rest of the world for the next 5 years. And I thought it was important to share that with you at the end of my presentation. Very, very quickly, some facts and figures. European textile industry, you know, 170 billion euro, 200,000 companies, 1.3 million workers, doing well, but facing tough competition. Our role as Euratex is to represent, to defend the interests of those 200,000 companies in Brussels at European level. So we are working with the European Commission, Parliament, and the Council. Just some trade figures. You can see who are our most important trading partners. These are the export countries. Switzerland, UK, US, but also China are very important trading partners. On the import side, we are sourcing our textile and apparel products mainly from China, our most important client, but also Bangladesh coming up very quickly. As you can see, over the last 10 years, they have doubled their exports towards the European Union. And of course, Turkey being a very important trading partner for us, for the EU. And then you can see the other countries on the slide. Just one slide on Euratex to announce that since June of this year, we have elected a new president. So Mr. Pacanelli has stepped down in June. And we have now Mario Jorge Machado from Portugal, who is coming into Euratex as president. I think many of you will remember Mario Jorge. He has been the host for the ITMF conference, I think a couple of years ago in Porto. And he's certainly looking forward to work with all of you. For the rest, you can see our membership, which is basically the whole associations, textiles and apparel from Europe, including Turkey, but also including the broader textile ecosystem. So it's not just textile and apparel, it's also textile machine makers, and Simatex has joined us recently, and individual companies with whom we work. Because at Euratex, we very much believe in this necessity to cooperate in the wider ecosystem, in the wider textile ecosystem, to manage the transition that we are facing. Okay, let's get into the EU Sustainable Textile Strategy. So what is happening? And for those of you who would not be familiar, this is a quick recap. It started in 2020, the European Green Deal, strong focus on reducing also our industrial dependency, so trying to have a stronger industrial policy. That led in 2022 to the adoption of a master plan for the textile industry. Basically, the EU setting its vision, how the textile industry should reorganize itself to reduce our environmental footprint, to be more transparent, and at the same time to remain more competitive. So that vision, that communication from 2022, has meanwhile been translated into rules and regulations. And so what is happening since 2022 is Brussels is developing a fairly complex puzzle of legislation, putting together a coherent concept, a coherent vision to force the industry to become more sustainable, to promote a circular business model, as I said, to create more transparency, and at the same time to invest in innovation to remain competitive. On this slide, I've been using it before, you can see in a way a little bit 16 pieces of that puzzle. Actually, there are even more. So there are, on this slide, 16 pieces of legislation which are currently being developed and which will be important for all of you. Because anyone wanting to sell textile and apparel products on the European single market will have to comply with the rules that are included in those legislations. So, very quickly, it's a bit of a race because we don't have much time. The biggest piece of that puzzle is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, ESPR. Try to remember ESPR. Again, we don't have time to go into details, but ESPR is basically forcing all of us to produce higher quality products, higher quality in terms of durability, in terms of sustainability. And the EU is saying, if in the future your product does not match with that higher quality, it will no longer be allowed to be sold on the single market. That is what ESPR is all about. That legislation has been adopted just a few months ago, in July, and we are now translating that specifically for textile products. So we are negotiating today a t-shirt. How many times must a t-shirt be washable? until it loses its characteristics. 10 times, 50 times, 100 times, we are having those discussions right now. So that is very much on the table. At the same time, ESPR is introducing a so-called digital product passport, which will be a unique code that explains the entire production chain of every single garment sold on the single market. Where was the cotton coming from? Who has been doing the spinning? Which dye stuffs have been used? Which chemicals have been used? Every step will be included in one single unique digital product passport, a QR code that will be attached to every single garment. So that is the essence of ESPR. Again, we don't have time. Here you have the slides later on. You can see the timeline when all this will enter into force. Again, as Eurotex, we are currently negotiating the very technical details of those minimum requirements. We are talking about recycled contents. We're talking about durability. We are talking about repairability of garments. And at the same time, we are working on establishing this digital product passport, which is a fantastic task. Fantastic in a sense of extremely complicated, because it forces the entire supply chain to work together, to share data, to standardize data. So there are issues of confidentiality, there are issues of standardization. It's a massive work which is currently ongoing. That is ESPR. Second issue we work on is waste. The textile and apparel industry has a waste challenge. So the EU, as part of the strategy, is trying to reduce our waste. And again, there are many initiatives. The most important for you to know is that there will be a so-called extended producer responsibility for garment products. So tomorrow, when I will buy a shirt in Europe, I will pay not just the shirt, but I will pay an additional taxation, a small levy, which will be used to finance and to organize the separate collection, sorting, and recycling of our garment products. It's been decided, or it will be decided very soon, that such an EPR system will be put in place, and we are working out the details how this will work involving the textile industry. Linked to textile waste, again, we don't have time, but we have launched an important initiative bringing together the entire textile value chain into this rehabs initiative, where brands are working together with manufacturers, with chemical industry, with sorters, collectors, to upscale our capacity to recycle textile in Europe. We will have 8 or 9 million tons of waste, of textile waste in Europe. We can no longer export that waste because there are restrictions. So we need to manage that waste ourselves. And so we are trying to see how can we turn that waste into an opportunity, into a business opportunity. So how can we develop a recycling industry that is economically and financially viable? Moving on, addressing the consumer dimension. So there's a lot of legislation that will affect the producer, the manufacturer. There's also legislation that focuses on the consumer. And that is the Green Claims Initiative. And here it comes down to simplify and develop a scientific method to measure and to communicate with the consumer what is the environmental footprint of a garment. If I produce a t-shirt, what does it mean for the environment? We are developing scientific methods, big discussions within the industry, trying to create a benchmark. And that benchmark is this product environmental footprint, which you can see on the screen. That will be the reference. A t-shirt has a footprint of X, so that later on, everybody producing t-shirts will be able to refer to X to say, we are better than X, or we are worse than X. So that is the idea of the footprint. We are also revising the textile labeling, the etiquette in your garments. Looking at what should be included in that label, compulsory, what should be put in a digital label, do we need to develop new fiber names, how do we standardize, a lot of discussion, but the textile label in Europe will change in the years to come. There is more we are introducing due diligence legislation. So the EU, again, as part of this package, as part of this vision for the textile industry, is putting more responsibility on specifically the brands, also the manufacturers, to make sure that they comply with all the social regulations, environmental standards, and not just the company themselves as a brand, as a manufacturer, but your entire supply chain. So through this legislation, the Commission, the European Union, is adding pressure, liability, to make sure that companies will take care of their supply chain, and if you don't, there will be punishments, there will be consequences. There are other dossiers, I just summarized them here. We are negotiating with India, we are negotiating with Indonesia. We have the Pan-Euromed Convention on Rules of Origin, which has been adopted. We are reforming the customs union, the customs code, addressing de minimis regulation. So there's many, many other points, but again, the short and important message is that the regulatory landscape within which all of you are operating, if you want to do business with Europe, that regulatory landscape is changing dramatically and is pushing all of us towards more sustainability, more durability, higher quality, more transparency. These are the buzzwords that are on the table. Final slide, if I may, is to really share with you, as I said, we have a new government in Europe. Look at those 4 names. These are the most critical people for the next 5 years. Starting with von der Leyen, a new president of the European Council, so the president of the European Union. And with that new European government, there is one document which I invite you to read, which is this document, Europe's Choice Political Guidelines. This is the political agenda of the European Union for the next 5 years. And this is my last slide, Mustafa. There's a lot of information there, but please have a quick look, take a picture. These are all quotes from that document.
Presentations are already in our webpage anyway.
So please have a look at that, because it does indicate how Europe is adapting its relations also with the rest of the world, towards being more assertive, towards being more critical, taking care of its own industry. So again, in the interest of time, I will stop it here. Okay. But bear that in mind, read that document. I'm happy to discuss later on in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. For manufacturers, we haven't already digested the earlier ones, and the new ones are coming in terms of legislation, so good luck for us. So our next speaker, Mr. Tomiyoshi-san, please, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I apologize to be late. I have to participate in another meeting before this conference. That's why, once again, I'm sorry to be late. And I'm Kenji Tomiyoshi from Japan Textile Federation. This is for the first time to participate in the ITMF annual meeting. And also, this is for the first time to visit Uzbekistan. Okay. It is my great pleasure to be here and talk about the Japanese recent situation and the sustainability policies. Okay. I don't have much time. I prepared 2 long contents, so a little bit shortcut my presentation. The first, I briefly explain about the Japanese textile garment industry, and the second, main sustainability policies in the Japanese government, and the last one, the circular economy initiative in the Japanese textile garment industries. Okay, then let's start and the current status of the Japanese textile garment industries. The first slide is the position of the textile industry in Japan. Unfortunately, the textile industry in Japan is not a major industry. accounting for only a few percent of the total manufacturing industry. However, looking at our history, the textile industry was one of the most important sectors of the Japanese economy from 1868, the beginning of the year of Japan's modernization and the end of the samurai era. Since until the early 1970s, a period of the rapid economic growth of Japan, in this era, more than 10% in each year growth. And it was located in the center of the exporting industry for approximately 100 years. Subsequently, Japan's main industry shifted to the automobile and electronics industries, but the textile industry continued to expand and reached its peak in 1991 in terms of value of shipments. When the Japanese economy was booming in the bubble economy, the textile industry shrunk rapidly after the collapse of the bubble economy and is currently only 1/4 of its peak size. However, the decline has stopped in last decade and has remained almost flat. Okay, next page, I quit. And I turn to the import-export trade. For the Japanese situation for export and import, the year 1985 is a key point. It is the year of the Plaza Accord. After the Plaza Accord, the rapid yen appreciation occurred, and this means we lost completely export competitiveness, resulting in the large trade deficit after 1985. Okay. I skip this page. And last two slides show you the clothing market situation in Japan. As with the textile manufacturing, the market size peaked in the same year, 1991, at over 15 trillion yen, approximately about 100 billion US dollars, and then began to shrink and is now less than 60% of its peak size right now. However, the volume of clothing supply has continued to increase, even in the shrink of the size of the market. The current supply is almost double compared with that of 1991, when the market was peaked. As a result, commodity prices have been falling for the last 30 years. The market is behaving according to the economic theory of supply and demand. Producing proper quantity of clothing is a major sustainability issue for Japanese textile industry, not only from the point of view of environment, but also from point of view of the corporate management. Okay, let's go to the next section about sustainability policies. Okay. This is the slide for Japanese sustainability policy in 2020s. There are a lot of policies: carbon neutrality until carbon neutrality till 2050, and also the circular economy vision 2020, and also the textile policy vision in 2022. These vision show us that the textile industry is some kind of center of the sustainability policy in Japan. Okay. And also in Japan, Japanese government and the textile industry, in 2022, we have the guideline for responsible business conduct to protect the human rights. The next page is the Circular Economy Vision 2020. So this vision set the 5 important industry. One of them is the textile industry. So this slide shows the key points of the vision on textile industry that was announced in 2022. This vision outlined a direction to strengthen the Japanese textile industry and expand the new markets by 2030. There is 3 structured policies and 2 cross-sectional policies. One of the cross-sectional policy is here, the promotion of sustainability. Okay. So to realize the resource circulation of the textile production, it is necessary to know the material flow of clothing. In Japan, every year, 500,000 tons of clothing are disposed. But we have to change these disposal textile to the resources. So in order to change the resources, there are 4 points. The formulation guideline for environmental friendly design, so-called eco-design, and standardization of environmental friendly materials, and the promotion of fiber-to-fiber recycling, and of course the policy support is needed. Okay. Toward the realization of circularity, we have to identify the challenges of each stage of a supply chain, from manufacturing, recycling, collecting, selling, these 4 supply chain. We have to communicate, we have to merge each sector's challenges. Okay, so that's last one is the circular economy initiative in Japanese industries. I'd like to skip this initiative of each company's Uniqlo, the famous Japanese brand, and Onward, and also this is the Torres initiative. So the Japanese big companies have its own initiative to promote sustainability. And this is the sustainability challenge system in the chemical fiber industry. As a matter of fact, in Japan, Japan Chemical Fiber Association is one of the most aggressive association within the Japanese textile associations. This is a whole picture of the chemical fiber industry's initiative of sustainability. PET recycling, bio-based fibers, and fiber-to-fiber recycling. In Japan, PET recycling is very popular. More than 9% of the PET bottle is recycled. But recently, Japanese bottlers would like to make the bottle-to-bottle recycling. So in Japan, it is difficult for chemical fiber industry to get the recycled PET bottle to make the recycled fibers. So we have to change the system to make the fiber-to-fiber recycling using the PET from the polyester fiber. So in order to realize the fiber-to-fiber recycling, we have to make some research and development endeavors to, for example, to sort or to sorting the waste clothes, and also to separate the mixed materials of the clothing. Okay, this is the recycle-related R&D programs in Japan. So there are 3. So the section, oh, sorry. The section B, the sorting and separation technology development for the fiber-to-fiber recycling. This is the bio-based fiber policies. So I don't have enough time, so I quit it. And also, the chemical fiber industry have concentrated the fiber fragment issues also. This is a sustainability challenges and net manufacturers recycling the system use nylon fishing net that the association make the recycling system. So the last page, I'd like to point out the standardization work towards the circular economy. There are three projects to make the standardization. One is environmental friendly fibers, means that recycled fibers and bio-based fibers. Japan would like to make the standardization. And B is some kind of a DPP project in Japan. And C, the eco-design standardization. We are now discussing in these three standardization. That's all that our Japanese situation in circularity. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now the floor is to Ms. Yan. She is from Siantak, biggest manufacturer in the world, China. I would like to just add a small, one of my small sentence before she starts. Right after the conference last year, I visited many factories in my sector. What I saw was amazing in terms of the regulations, how it works, or water treatments. China has really done a good work. So let's see what the new regulations are coming from China.
Okay, thank you, Mustafa. Good afternoon, everyone. Now it's my old face, but I'm happy in the ITMF annual conference here again. I would like today, I will not touch anything about the Chinese textile capacity or current market situation. I would like to touch the quality development of our industry. So that's why I would like to share the view of green policy transformation in China and the industry practices conducted by CNTAC, China National Textile and Apparel Council, that I'm working for. CNTAC was the first national organization across industries in China to set up the independent social responsibility office. The office works on the research, stakeholder engagement, and the pilot practice for improving continually sustainability performance of the industry. That's our Chinese contribution for global sustainability governance of the common challenges, such as climate change, biodiversity. Today, when we talk about the policies, there are many policies appearing globally, like a bamboo shooting. Just now, the colleague from Europe and from Japan also touched this point. Also in China, we have many policies. So that's a general list. I'm listing some of the very important green policies relevant to the industry. How about the feeling? Complicated, right? The policies show direction of the development. At the same time, this policy are kind of challenges to our industry, because our industry has very long and decentralized supply chain, and we consist of SMEs. Now, I'm going to pick up 5 major policies for more details. The first one is implementation plan of dual control of carbon emission. This implementation plan was issued by the State Council on July 30th of this year. China is establishing a new mechanism for the transformation from dual control of energy consumption to dual control of carbon emissions. The implementation plan sets up 3 phases of carbon control and highlights 6 different key levels. The plan requires by 2025, the carbon emission accounting system will be further improved with a set of industry-specific carbon emission accounting standards and the product carbon footprint standards to be introduced and implemented. The National Greenhouse Gas Emission Factor Database will be basically completed. That's a foundation for our next 5 years, starting from 2026 to 2029, just before the national carbon peaking target of 2030. The second policy I would like to mention is implementation plan for establishing a carbon footprint management system. This policy was issued by the Ministry of Ecology and Environmental and 15 other government departments. My draw attention to it. The plan has 2 target deadlines. By 2027, it will require a basic product carbon footprint management system and the standards for 100 products to be developed. By 2030, is more strict product standards will be required, along with a supporting certification and a labeling system. Now, the third policy is a notice on strengthening the link between green energy certificate and energy saving and carbon reduction policies to vigorously promote non-fossil energy consumption. Very long time, very long name. The notice was issued in January of this year, jointly by NDRC together with the National Bureau of Statistics and the National Energy Administration. In China's textile and apparel industry, from supply chain perspective, based on our assessment, about 65% to the production carbon footprint is from the energy contribution. Therefore, making the electricity greener or carbon-free is very crucial for the carbon neutrality of the textile industry. The fourth policy I would like to mention is of circularity, very hot topic in the global fashion industry right now. China released the first circular economy policy for the textile sector in 2022, implementation guidance on accelerating the recycling of the used textiles. It has very important goals. By 2025, that's the next year, the recycling rate of waste textiles will be 25%, and the output of recycled fibers of waste textile will reach 2 million tons. And by 2030, the target is more strict. Corresponding to the national policy, Sentag issued the Industry 14th 5-year Green Development Guidance. By 2025, it requires biodegradable materials and green fiber production will make annual growth more than 10%, and the recycling fiber annual processing volume will account for 50% of the total fiber processing. Okay, now it's a 5 policy of ESG, information disclosure. It is the first time ESG appeared in a top-level official Chinese policy document in the past January. After that, both the Ministry of Finance and the State-owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, they both released ESG disclosure guidelines. And China's major stock exchanges also clarified the types of companies that are subject to mandatory disclosure. This marks the sustainability information disclosure shifts from voluntary to mandatory. But we shall be proud to see Sentag started promoting transparency and information disclosure starting in 2008. So, when we go through all these major policies, we can see the main topic on ESG, climate change, and circularity. For textile industry, we are always facing the many challenges along the way. So, CNTC has been working closely with various stakeholders to launch pioneer practices so as to explore the industry solutions. For climate change topic, we developers and create complete tools and platforms. On the start of the industry climate innovation action, we involved the leading brands and enterprises for the acceleration program of carbon neutrality. The program developers and sets up the digital product lifecycle evaluation platform, LC+, and localized carbon emission factor database. So, from the product perspective, it can help enterprises in carrying out environmental footprint work and improve the carbon emission intensity of textile products. And the e-com database has been initially established, containing 13 textile materials and environmental impact localization factors of their processing processes. CNTC also established carbon neutral standards for the whole supply chain, from factories, products to retail stores, supporting the enterprises to standardize their carbon neutral work. For the topic of ESG information disclosure, we set up a carbon information disclosure platform for the companies who are pioneer in our acceleration program. And also, just in the past August, this platform, we helped international retailer in having 80% of the Chinese suppliers to disclose their carbon information, with 416 suppliers already completed registration and share their carbon targets. Based on this platform, and we're also working on with China Central Bank, People's Bank of China, to explore a mechanism for green finance to support ESG information disclosure in the supply chain of SMEs. Circularity is quite hot in fashion industry. CNTC is tackling the current challenges through two key areas: sustainable material innovation and digital product passports. Materials are quite critical for textile recycling challenging. Starting from 2021, we teamed up with Lansing and Eastman to launch the Future Materials project, exploring what is the next decade could bring us. Right now, all the materials we are using comes from resources the Earth has developed over the past 5 billion years. So the question is, how can we recycle existing resources instead of asking more from the planet? One real-life example is one Chinese company working on CCUS. They can capture CO2 emissions from industry process and turn them into polyester fibers. They are currently able to capture 10,000 of CO2 per year, producing 30,000 tons of polyester fiber, equal in quality to petroleum based on polyester. That is a practical step towards a material innovation. Now, for the DPP, over the past 10 years, we working together with the ITMF, WWF, and several brands has worked on the research projects. And we have realized we need a better model and approaches to be more scalable and effective. So over the past years, we have been working into new strategy. And we are evaluating whether recycling textile waste brings more environmental benefits or harm, and how to fairly distribute responsibility. The most important thing, very important part, is to really advance extended producer responsibility. We already started the DPP work, starting from development standards and the platforms. And we aim to roll out the digital IDs for textile products in China next year. This would allow products to be fully traceable, identifiable, and recyclable through their entire life cycle. That's all from me today. I look forward to have a more collaboration and a joint innovation so that we can work together for the contribution to SDG for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yan. Now, Steve Lamar, we are on the biggest purchasing site, the USA, one of the most influential person in Washington, D.C.
Great, thanks Mustafa, and thanks to all of our hosts for inviting us here. And let me just make sure I can get this going, maybe not. There we are. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through some slides to give you a sense of what's happening in the United States. First, just talk about some of the recent and some of the pending regulatory developments. Focus a little bit on what we've been doing at AFA, and then talk about some some of the future prospects in 2025. What we've done here is just really divided up these areas into kind of the key policy areas. It looks very much, I think, a little bit like what Dirk was talking about, sort of to divide up each of these each of these kind of diverse regulatory requirements into some of the discrete sort of disciplines and policy areas that you see. And so rather than get into the individual regulatory requirements that are happening up here, we don't have nearly enough time to talk about that in any level of detail. I just wanted to kind of give you a flavor of what's occurring. And the trend that I really want you to come away with is that even though we are a country of the United States, the activity is largely occurring at the various state levels. That's what's going on. There is still stuff occurring at the federal level, but most of the stuff that's happening that's going to affect the industry is really occurring at the state level. So in the areas of traceability and transparency and due diligence, kind of group those two together. They often kind of run together in our opinion. And I often say that 10 years from now, when we look back at this period of time, we will find that this is the area where we became the most transparent, the most traceable, and it's because of some of these requirements and some of the requirements that you've heard about from my colleagues. Just briefly, at the federal level, of course, we have the UFLPA, which is really focused on forced labor, but you're exercising the same muscles that you're going to be exercising to really talk about your supply chain, to trace your supply chain, regardless of what it might be, whether it's for environmental purposes, for labor purposes. Of course, in California, we've long had a Supply Chain Transparency Act, which requires you to disclose whether you are taking steps on to stop slavery in your supply chain. And what you'll see here is stuff in green is stuff that's already enforced, stuff in yellow is stuff that's proposed to be out there. We, by the way, don't have a DPP that we're working on, but we do have some members of Congress that are trying to propose some voluntary concept. The area of extended producer responsibility, and this is a place where there's a lot of activity, including 2 weeks ago, California just passed the first in the nation law to really collect textile waste, textile apparel, footwear, accessories waste. You will often see it referred to as a recycling bill. I want you to get that out of your heads right now. It is not a recycling bill right now, it is a collection bill. Maybe it will become a recycling bill, but right now the way it's been written in California isn't really to talk about recycling, it's to talk about collection. It's going to be up to the producer responsibility organization and probably future changes to make it more of a recycling bill, something that is more about the circular economy as opposed to just collecting. We already have a lot of EPR programs in place for plastics packaging. You're going to continue to see that occur both at the packaging level and at the end product, the textile level. Climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, another area where there's a lot of activity. Actually, this is one of those places where the federal government is trying to take action. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission has put out a proposal to require disclosure, but that's for public companies and some private companies, but mostly public companies. That's been tied up in court action. In California, where you've actually also seen something come up, which has also been tied up in court action, that's probably, in our opinion, going to take effect a lot sooner than what's happening at the federal level, although the elections may change that. And again, in both cases, it is about trying to get companies to do a better job of disclosing their Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Sustainability claims, again, something else we've seen a lot about, really targeting kind of this greenwashing concept, is making sure that consumers have enough information that they can make decisions about the sustainability aspects, the environmental aspects of different products. This is an area that there's a lot of prep work being done, but not a lot of, certainly at the federal level, not a lot of actually it's happening. We have this Federal Trade Commission, the US Federal Trade Commission has long published something called Green Guides. We're in the middle of another Green Guide revision. I don't know when it's gonna come out. And if it does, or when it does, I don't know if it's gonna be all that useful, but it is certainly something that we've put a lot of energy into try to help give, again, more guidance to the industry, so as they're making these claims, they sort of know kind of what the rules of the road are. In the area of chemical management, and this is a place that we spent an awful lot of time on, most recently in areas like PFAS and BPA. This is sort of that broad suite of policies that basically say you shouldn't have X chemical, X substance in your product, right? Because we don't want to expose consumers to some kind of product safety concern because of that chemical. There is a wide variety of laws that are already on the books and a wide variety of laws that are being proposed across the states. And I'll show you a couple of slides that'll scare you in a little bit on this particular issue. Again, most of this is at the state level. There are some federal things. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is the federal agency that does govern the product safety issues, a lot of the chemical management issues, along with the Environmental Protection Agency. But the real tip of the spear work in this area is occurring at the states. Get this, here we are. Related, of course, is product safety, and then here, this is really focused, I think, at the federal level. And again, the way we've broken this up, where there's the chemical management issues, and then there's other kinds of product safety issues, things like, you know, drawstrings or flammable fabrics and things of that sort. There's a lot of existing requirements that are out there, well established. Nothing's really changed too much in the case of, you know, things like lead and phthalates that's been around for a number of years. But there are more, there's more effort to do reporting, as products are coming through the border, more information collection. And one of the areas where we're really optimistic about seeing some changes, again, at the federal level, and there may be some state level stuff that occurs here too, is making sure that online marketplaces, you know, there is so much of our business is now done online, so many products are now sold online. There's a lot of third-party marketplaces. Are those third-party marketplaces, so they're selling somebody else's products, are they responsible for those products that are being sold? In the area of product safety, there's been a lot of news that's been generated recently with respect to companies like Amazon. We've seen Shein and Temu in the headlines recently. But the other issue is about counterfeits. And a lot of people don't really think about it from the perspective of counterfeits, but if a product is a counterfeit that is sold on one of these third-party marketplaces, it's also got product safety violations. It's also got worker rights violations. It's not just identity theft of the brand that's going on there. And so there's a lot of effort that's being done at the federal level to try to make these marketplaces responsible for those products that are being sold. And then lastly, on worker rights, both federal level stuff and state level activity to make sure that products that are either produced in the United States or produced around the world meet basic standards, and you're more responsible for them, you're more liable for them. There's zero tolerance in the case of the UFLPA to make sure that you don't have products that are made with forced labor in your supply chain. So one of the slides I was going to show you that's kind of scary. So here's a map of the United States. There's the 50 states. And you see just the PFAS textile bans that have come out there. Each one of these are different. Different rules, different testing standards. You know, over about a 5 or 6 year period as they've all begun to kind of finally be implemented and enforced. And inventory is exhausted, they'll look the same. But right now, as we're going through this transition period, it is anyone's guess, like, which is going to be the most important one of them that people have to follow. But you'll see a lot of trends here that California and New York tend to be the leaders of some of these. Sustainability regulations of different kinds, different kinds of sustainability regulations. They're out there. Some of them are in fact in place, some of them are proposed. There's some combination of both. And again, this is just what's happened so far. Next year or the year after that, we may begin to see more of them. Real briefly go into a couple of things that we've been doing at AFA. We have this thing we call the THREADS protocol. Nice industry word. It's actually an acronym, and the acronym stands for T for transparently harmonized and developed, or transparently developed and enforced. H is harmonized across jurisdictions and industries to the extent that's possible. Realistic timelines, enforceable, adjustable, designed for success, and science-based. This is a set of good regulatory principles that we've been sharing with legislators, regulators, policymakers, basically saying, this is how you should be writing these new laws. You shouldn't make a law that says something here and something here, and then they conflict with each other. And if we had more time, and maybe in the Q&A if somebody wants to ask me a question, I'll give you some examples of some places where there are some just ridiculous contradictions between Law A and Law B that are intended to do the same thing. And of course, you're going to hear from my colleague Nate in a little bit talking about digital labeling and some of the contradictions that come about, which has led us to kind of work on that. In the 51 seconds that I've got left, let me just give you a little bit of an outlook for what we're going through in the United States. If you don't know, we have an election on November 5th. It's going to be a new administration. We will probably see changes in the partisan control in both chambers of Congress, although not sure, right? We don't know what's going to happen for sure. And then at the state level, we'll possibly see supermajorities. And what I mean by supermajority is one party or the other controls so many seats that they can pretty much ignore the other party, which means they're going to go to excess. So if it's Democrats, they're going to go with excess to the left. Republicans will go excess to the right. And when that occurs, it means they don't have to work with people that don't agree with them. And that's where you start to get into some real dangerous policies that make things really difficult to administer. Couple of quick points here. The regulatory focus will stay primarily at the state level. So bone up on your US geography. At the federal level, we'll see some existing enforcement. Obviously, that'll still play well with voters and whatnot. You'll see more proposals, but they're going to be swallowed up by sort of other priorities, right? Next year, we're going to be worrying about our tax code. They'll be talking about sustainable, and they'll be talking about other things, but taxes is going to be the number one effort of business and so forth. There will be opportunities to align with regulations. We keep telling all of our regulators, look at what Europe is doing, look at what China is doing, look at what Japan is doing, because we don't want to be doing different things than what they're doing. We need one global harmonized basis. The industry absolutely needs to be better engaged. Now, in the United States, we're not. We have not done the job that we need to when we're trying to pump that up in our industry. But I think globally, we need to be better engaged. And then lastly, we need a stronger buyer-supplier partnership. All of this falls apart unless there is really strong interconnectivity between the suppliers and the buyers to make sure that we can rely on each other, trust each other, and know we can get the job done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Well, in general, we did good with the timing. So now the floor is for question and answers. So, any questions? There is one, yep.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Frédéric Vanot. I'm representing CIRFS, which is the European Man-Made Fibers Association. And well, thank you for this very interesting session, which really shows how important sustainability and the environment has become and will be in future. Now, I wanted to come back to this last point on different rules, harmonization, fragmentation, because this is a big danger I see for the moment, not only within countries or blocs like Europe, but also between the major blocs here represented on the table. So if Europe has its DPP, China has its DPP, the US and Japan, well, that is obviously not positive for trade. So my question to the panel is, how can the associations present here around the table work for more harmonization in terms of legislations, but also in terms of standards? Because what we need is really global standards. Thank you.
Well, sure, I can. Frederick, absolutely, and you know we've been discussing this bilaterally. At Eurotex level, we are very much in favor of having such a global approach. First, from an environmental perspective, if only part of the textile industry, let's say the European companies, make that sustainability effort, and let's say the rest wouldn't make the effort, the impact, the positive impact on the planet will be limited. But also from a competition perspective, we need to make sure that companies in the textile industry, whether you are based in US, in Japan, in China, in Europe, operate with the same standards, with the same regulatory guidelines to ensure free and fair competition within the textile industry. So on that basis, as Eurotex, we are very much in favor of supporting this global dialogue. That's why we are happy to see ITMF and IEF coming together today. That's why we're happy to have this panel. And I can assure you, during the last 2 days, I've had bilateral talks with some of my colleagues here. We will engage in bilateral and multilateral dialogues on some of these points. Because as you said, we have a DPP, we're talking about EPR, we're talking about the same stuff. But so we should make sure that rolling out those regulations in technical details, there is compatibility so that our companies can operate in a free but fair open markets across the globe. So you certainly have the Eurotex commitment to work in that direction.
Maybe you can also rephrase that from the US point of view or Japan point of view.
Okay. From a point of the Japanese associations, we always ask the Japanese government to harmonize the regulation, especially between EU and Japan, because as a matter of fact, I think that European Union is the most aggressive and progressive regulatory system in sustainability sector. So I asked the government and also about the association, we'd like to cooperate with, for example, Eurotex or the other countries' association to, each association asked the government to harmonize the system. And also, we are discussing about how to communicate with the EU Commission. So that we asked the Brussels Japanese community what to do in the European community, that the Japanese government or the Japanese private sector to do in the harmonize the situation, so that both the government and the association and the collaborations are very important to harmonize the system.
Okay. So I suppose for the sustainability development, the role of association will be much more important than before. For the products development before, maybe several enterprises, if you work closely together, you can find fantastic products. But for sustainability issue, always will depend on multi-stakeholders engagement along all the supply chain. So it's also kind of challenging for the associations. According to our working experience, what we are doing is, first, we need to research what is happening globally. So we need to set up our communication and the dialogue with our counterparts from the States, from European countries, and from Japan, globally. So we know each other, what we are doing, what we are thinking, what our progress from each part in this area. And the second, we need to find the industry platform, industry solution for the whole industry, including the standards. The standards is to stipulate or standardize the way of SMEs how to cope with the challenges of sustainability. Besides, I suppose we need to have more engagement from the consumer side, from public side. So that means you need to set up the more stakeholder engagement. You need to have your pilot practices, including standards, and you need to have your voice and your progress to be heard by, in the public. By this kind of way, a general comprehensive platform will be set up for everyone to work together to facing the sustainability challenge.
So to say, our basic approach in the US is we look to see what they're doing, and then we go talk to our regulators and say, do the same thing. Right? That's literally what we've been doing. Or in the case of, for example, the California climate disclosure, if you've complied with something else, then you're deemed in compliance in California. So the idea is you don't have 2, 3, 10 different things you have to meet. You just have one thing you have to meet. We are a global industry. We should operate globally, and that's what it should be done. I think that helps us for now, but what I really think, and maybe we can work on this, is a kind of an industry manifesto where we get the trade associations from around the world, many in the room here, those that aren't, to kind of come together and agree on a common set of regulatory principles. We've got something in the US that's working for us, but I'm not saying we adopt that. I'm saying we come up with something to say, as we look at the various pieces of sustainability, here are the ways in which these need to look, both being practical and enforceable, but being harmonized with each other. Because otherwise, it doesn't help us. We should be looking at these regulations to solve some of the problems that we've been having, to help us become scalable, to help us really create some solutions. And if it's the China version or the US version or the California version, it's going to get in the way. It's not going to help things. It's going to actually set us back.
Yes.
Nate Herman with the American Apparel and Footwear Association. Going back to the question that you raised, Steve, in your presentation about the contradictions in the regulations, can you talk about some of those between social responsibility and sustainability, or between chemical restrictions and the ability to do a circular economy or have recycling? Can you talk about some of those?
So I'll give you one good example, which just is really driving me, but many of us up the wall here. So we have a new law that passed a couple of years ago in the US, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which, to be clear, affects anybody importing anything from any country into the United States. It is not China-focused. It is not apparel-focused. It is anything that is imported into the United States has to meet the rules of the UFLPA. Everything that's made in Uzbekistan that is going to the United States has to meet the UFLPA. So just be very clear about that concept. What it does is it basically says you have to be prepared to trace all the way back to the origin every element of every product that comes in. So just to use this really clear example, if I'm importing a bottle, I have to be able to say, I know exactly where the bottle came from, where the cap came from, where the label came from, and if there's something in the bottle, what that something comes from. I have to be able to prove that all the way back to the origin. Think about whether you can do that if you have recycled content here. If you've got recycled content in the product that you're bringing into the United States, you can easily go back to the recycler. I say easily. should be easily able to go back to the recycler. But to go back to the constituent products from which that recycled material was made, it's almost impossible. To prove provenance of the virgin material for something that's recycled, you can't be done. When we asked customs about it, they said, well, don't do that. You can't bring that in. So the end result of this is that the US has imposed a de facto ban on importing anything into the US that contains recycled content. Let me just say that again. The US has a de facto ban on importing anything into the US made with recycled content as a side effect of the way they're implementing the UFLPA. Doesn't mean the UFLPA is a bad law. It just means they've reached a conclusion about how to implement that law, and therefore you can't do this. This has become a huge roadblock and has led to bankruptcies of companies making recycled material. We need to get that changed, otherwise we're going to be stopping the development of scalable, recyclable materials in our industry, certainly if you look at the US market for a long time to come.
Thank you. Now we have the microphone here, but please take the microphone back after that.
Thank you. It's glad that today we have representatives from the US Apparel Association and Eurotex. These are the largest global markets for apparel, and also the house to the biggest global brands. In past, Uzbekistan was boycotted by majority of brands globally because of issues of child and forced labor. The country has come a long way since after this ban was lifted. But yet we see there's a great reluctance of brands moving the supply chain, or if at all, a very cautious first steps. What, in your opinion, are the reasons why the brands are still continuing to keep away from Uzbekistan while the country has shown a lot of step forwards to address the issues which in the first place allowed them to boycott? That's one. My other question is that we're talking about sustainability and in the global supply chain, where when you move fiber from US to factories in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, and all over, to convert that into garments and then move back to US and Europe, the carbon footprints of such products are going to be very high. In contrast, in Uzbekistan, the government has introduced a cluster system which is largely integrated from farm to fabric to apparel, where single companies could be doing everything, where the traceability is very well marked, blockchain can be very well applied. Then still, in spite of all that, why do you see that Uzbek apparel industry is not really moving forward? There could be a piece of advice to the industry from the largest association of the largest markets where the garments are imported into. Thank you.
As you know, Eurotex, we represent the European manufacturing industry, textiles and apparel. We don't directly represent the brands, so I would rather not speak on behalf of the brands. Some of them are in the room. Maybe they can comment on that. I may have some personal opinion on that, but I would rather not officially respond on behalf of the brands.
Maybe
Steve, you want to talk from the US perspective?
I'll take that. One of the things we talk about when we refer to Uzbekistan is that it's, Uzbekistan's got a real new opportunity to make a first impression. There is a legacy that a lot of brands and retailers have looked to when they've seen Uzbekistan over the last few years. Obviously that's changed. Things have markedly different than where we were. But as things improve, is improvement steady and high, or is improvement sort of flat moving? I don't know the answer to that. And as companies are looking to build supply chain partners, new supply chain partners in many cases, they're going to have to work with people that they're going to feel very, very comfortable with. And that takes time. It takes time for those relationships to develop. So even as you move from where we were to where we are now, and you've seen progress. Again, different brands will view the progress either faster or slower. You're going to see brands still being very cautious about developing those new supply chain relationships. And the reason being is this. There's a great diversification going on in our industry. Companies are looking for new suppliers, they're looking for new partners, but they're also looking to find people, find individuals, companies that they can be with for a long time. They want to have responsible contracting practices with them. They want to know that when they're communicating all of these regulations to them, some of which won't make sense, that we've all talked about, that they're going to have partners they're going to be able to understand, they're going to be able to implement them, that they're going to be able to trust that they can do those things. And conversely, the suppliers are going to have trust in the brands, that you're going to actually pay us on time. You're not going to leave at the first sign of trouble, that we're going to have a long-term relationship. And it just takes time for that to happen. I wish we had more time that we could make that occur. We don't. So we just have to redouble our efforts to make sure that, you know, people hear about good developments that are going on in these countries, and that we can accelerate the learning curve, you know, so that as companies become more aware of what's going on, that they hear about it. I think a great opportunity here is the fact that we're holding this conference in Uzbekistan. I think it really helps put Uzbekistan back on the map. And I'm hoping that, you know, that will continue to echo and reverberate throughout the, you know, the C-suite and the sourcing offices of brands and retailers all throughout the world.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'd like to ask quickly just about the costs of compliance or the trade-offs. Each member of the panel has discussed regulatory efforts to improve the sustainability of the fashion value chain. But compliance always involves trade-offs, and somebody will have to pay the costs of complying with these regulations. And I'd just like to ask each member if there have been estimates of what those costs are and who's going to pay them. Thank you.
How much time do we have? It's a critical question, and it's a question that, you know, my 200,000 textile companies in Europe are very much concerned about, because indeed they see that compliance efforts, you know, coming up in a big way as a result of all the regulation, and the question they have is who's going to pay for that. That leads to a whole debate about consumer behavior, about transparency of the costs and the price of your products towards the consumer. That leads to a discussion between the manufacturer and the brands, and who takes responsibility. And again, there's no easy short answer. Maybe what I would say is that there is in any case an environmental cost to pay. And as my incoming president has said already, either the planet pays or the consumer pays that cost. So we need to find a fair balance in how to absorb that cost. And we need to make sure that this environmental cost does not become a subject of unfair, unequal competition between those that would absorb, that would invest in sustainability, that would absorb an environmental cost, so to speak, and others who do not comply, that do not therefore have that environmental cost. So that's critically important, that we all across the global textile industry make that investment, and then we need to have a fair discussion within the value chain, with the brands, with the consumers, how to, in a fair way, how do we absorb and manage that cost equally. But there is a cost. We need to make sure it doesn't become a subject of unfair competition within our textile value chain.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Can we have... microphone over there? He has it, okay. No? Maybe you can speak a bit louder.
Thank you. Well, my name is Fatima from Morocco. Actually, I have a practical question. Part of it goes back to the previous question. I mean, let's assume I'm a garment manufacturer from Morocco. I'm the last loop that will be exporting the garment to the European market. You talked about the digital passport and the other requirements in terms of sustainability and compliance and so on. So effectively, who's responsible to make sure that this garment that I will be exporting from Morocco to any place in Europe is going to get through? Is it my responsibility as a manufacturer? Is it the brand or the retailer's responsibility? And in which case, what is the process? Because from our standpoint, the way we see it is that if we export the good and the good doesn't get through, so how do we make sure that at least we're getting paid for the work that we've done in Morocco if it's not our responsibility to make sure that the good is compliant to the regulation in Europe? And then I have to ask again the same question that was asked earlier. Yesterday we saw a presentation where it was said that the consumer price index of most of the product was going up, except for apparel. So that kind of means that the final consumer is not willing to pay more for a more sustainable and more compliant product. So who's gonna pay that extra cost down the line? And from a manufacturer's standpoint, in a supply chain where the margins are already very constrained and very small, we're all wishing and hoping that it's not gonna be the final supplier at the end of the value chain. And then if it's the supplier, it's also the worker at the end of the value chain that will be paying the cost of that new compliance and new regulation. Thank you.
You said what you can.
Exactly. Fatima, I fully endorse and agree what you said in that the short answer, this requires a new type of partnership, a new type of dialogue between the manufacturer and the brands to come to a fair deal, because costs will be there, increased costs will be there. That cost cannot become a source of unfair competition, cannot become a source of squeezing the manufacturer kind of to the bottom. So we need a new kind of dialogue, and as Eurotex we are very open about that in a positive, constructive manner, but we need to have that, dialogue. When your first question about responsibility, it depends a little bit, for example, on the digital product passport, work is underway. For sure, in Europe, the brands are being targeted, will have to take some responsibility. And I refer, for example, to the due diligence legislation. The legislator will look, first of all, at the brand to see if that brand complies with all the due diligence and therefore all the environmental standards, the social standards that are connected to that. So for sure it puts pressure on the brands, and for sure that pressure will be transferred, if you want, into the manufacturers. And again, that requires a healthy, professional dialogue, partnership, I think Steve, you mentioned that word as well, between the manufacturer and the brands. And again, that's why we need to be sitting here all together and reorganize our industry.
Thank you. Let's have one more question. Please take the microphone over there. You can solve all the problems of everyone.
Navdeep Sodhi from Gertzi. One question is to Eurotex and the other to American Apparel and Footwear. So to Eurotex particularly, how are we involving customs into these discussions? Because at the end of the day, it boils down to border enforcement. So for example, have the separate HS codes through WCO being conceived where the products made from recycled materials can be easily identified? The second question to Steve Lamar is about AGOA. I'm not sure if you were present yesterday, but both IFC and Arise were here, and they've announced really big-ticket textile and apparel projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And many of these are founded on the premise that AGOA will be continued. Of course, it's not really in your hands because it's a political unilateral agreement, but just wanted to have your sense about it. Thank you.
If I were king for a day, I would have done AGOA this morning. So if it were in my hands, I would actually make it happen. Getting AGOA renewed is one of our top priorities. We've been trying to make it a top priority of Congress. Where we are now is there's no opposition to it at all. We hear over and over again how much people support it. And for those who don't know, African Growth and Opportunity Act, this is AGOA, this is the acronym. The problem we run into is that a lot of members of Congress and even the administration think there need to be improvements to AGOA. And I'll be the first to admit there probably could be some improvements to AGOA. But we're afraid they're going to talk those improvements to death to the point where it'll be September 30th of next year and we still won't have AGOA done yet. And next year is going to be extraordinarily difficult to get anything done. So we're making a big priority to get AGOA done this year. There'll be a little period of time after the election where there's an opportunity to get something done between November 5th and the end of the year. So if there's anyone in the room that cares about getting AGOA done, come up and see me during the break or after, because it is absolutely imperative that people in Congress hear from the constituents that care about AGOA that it has to get done this year before they turn out the lights.
Thanks. It's a very important question on customs and how do we control all this. This whole European textile strategy will only work with proper market surveillance. Meaning we need to make sure that if this jacket is produced anywhere in the world, will comply with those new higher standards which Europe is introducing. If there is free riding, if there is no proper control on the quality and the compliance of that product, the whole plan, the whole strategy falls apart. So market surveillance is very high on top of the European agenda. Then of course the question is, how do you do that? How do you increase control without creating unnecessary barriers? It's a very thin line, but it's something that we are trying to work out between the industry, the member states in Brussels, European Commission in Brussels, and there are some projects working towards market surveillance. Secondly, adapting the customs codes is something we very much support. And we've been discussing with WCO, the World Customs Organizations, to introduce what we call a green customs code, differentiating between basically a sustainable garment and a non-sustainable garment. Of course, the first problem is how do you define sustainable and non-sustainable? Sure. That discussion is ongoing. I will share really my frustration that WCO is a very, very, very slow process. It's years of meetings and negotiations, which honestly I don't think we have. So therefore, any effort from all of us to push the members of WCO to speed up basically adapting the customs code to allow to make that differentiation between, sustainable products, recycled material, what Steve was saying, you cannot import recycled material because it doesn't fit in the American customs code. So that would certainly help to reorganize that kind of global sustainable textile industry.
Thank you. That concludes our session. A round of applause for my distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. We have some gifts, I suppose. Coming? No.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to announce coffee break time. We will wait you back here in 3:30. Also, don't forget about the very interesting and maybe important for now parts of our presentations.